A hunter finds himself injured in a brutal blizzard. He slips down a slope into a ravine, badly twisting his ankle in the process. Then the unimaginable happens. Wolves. Their howls grow nearer, and he realizes he's become prey. But then, the most surprising thing occurs. The wolves wait. See for yourself. The blizzard struck swiftly and with ferocity, leaving Henry stranded in the remote wilderness. A misstep on the icy ground sent him tumbling down a ravine, his leg contorted painfully beneath him. As night descended, the howls of wolves echoed through the forest. Henry's heart raced with fear. He knew they were closing in, and he was powerless. The crunch of snow beneath their paws signaled their approach. Trapped and injured, Henry prepared for the worst, his breath visible in the frigid air as he fought to stay conscious. Henry had been a hunter for as long as he could remember. Raised in the rugged terrain of Montana, he knew the wilderness like the back of his hand. His father had taught him everything about survival, tracking, and respecting nature. Over the years, Henry had faced countless challenges, but nothing quite like this. The blizzard had turned the forest into a frozen labyrinth. Trees, once familiar landmarks, now stood as ghostly silhouettes shrouded in swirling snow. The temperature had plummeted, and the wind cut through his clothing like a knife. Visibility was near zero. It was almost impossible to navigate. Each breath he took sent a sharp pain through his chest as the cold air bit into his lungs. Henry lay at the bottom of the ravine with his leg twisted at an unnatural angle. Pain radiated from his ankle up to his hip. It made every movement agonizing. He knew he couldn't move far, if at all. His supplies were scattered from the fall. Most importantly, his rifle lay just out of reach. He was stranded with no means to defend himself. As the sky darkened, the howls of wolves grew louder. Henry's pulse quickened. He knew the wolves were following the scent of his blood. Like typical predators, they were drawn by his vulnerability. In normal circumstances, he would respect their place in the ecosystem, but now, injured and alone, they represented a deadly threat. The pack was closing in. Their primal cry sent shivers down Henry's spine. He could picture their lean bodies moving stealthily through the snow and their eyes gleaming with hunger. The wilderness, which had always been his ally, had turned against him. The immediate threat was clear. He was now prey in a battle for survival. The howls grew closer. Henry strained to see through the swirling snow. He could barely move, and the pain in his leg was relentless. Suddenly, dark shapes emerged from the white haze. The pack, led by a large gray alpha, approached with cautious, predatory steps. Their eyes glowed with curiosity and hunger. Henry counted at least 5 wolves. Each one was a formidable force of nature. Henry's fear surged. He knew he had to act quickly. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he managed to grab a large branch nearby. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. He waved it frantically and shouted in a harsh voice, trying to appear larger and more threatening. The wolves paused to assess their injured prey. "Get back," Henry yelled. The alpha wolf growled and bared its teeth. Henry swung the branch wildly. The movement forced the nearest wolf to retreat a few steps, but he knew this was only a temporary reprieve. The pack was patient. They would wait for an opportunity to strike. His mind raced. He needed to buy more time. With his free hand, he fumbled through his pockets and found a flare. His fingers were numb from the cold, and he struggled to ignite it. Finally, the flare sputtered to life. It cast an eerie red glow in the snowy darkness. The wolves recoiled at the sudden burst of light and heat. Henry waved the flare. The sizzling sound and bright light created a temporary barrier between him and the pack. The wolves circled warily, but they didn't retreat far. They were intelligent and knew their advantage. Henry was injured and alone. It was only a matter of time. Desperation and adrenaline kept him alert. He knew he couldn't keep the wolves at bay forever. The flare wouldn't last long, and his strength was waning. His vision blurred from the cold and pain, but he remained determined. He would fight to his last breath, using every ounce of strength and resource he had. The wolves were closing in again. They were biding their time, and Henry's battle for survival had just begun. As the minutes dragged on, the heat from the flare seared his fingers. The wolves maintained their distance, circling just outside the light's reach. But then something unexpected happened. The alpha wolf locked his eyes on Henry and let out a series of low, rumbling sounds. The pack seemed to respond, their attention shifting from Henry to their leader. The alpha stepped back. To Henry's astonishment, it turned and disappeared into the swirling snow. The other wolves hesitated before following suit, vanishing one by one into the darkness. The sudden silence was almost deafening. The only remaining sound was the soft hiss of the dying flare. Henry's mind struggled to make sense of what had just happened. For a few moments, he remained frozen, waiting for the wolves to return, but they didn't. Instead, an eerie calm settled over the ravine. Henry's fear began to give way to confusion. What could have driven the wolves away? He knew their behavior well, and this was unlike anything he had ever encountered. Just as he started to relax, thinking perhaps the flare had done its job, he heard a rustling sound. His muscles tensed, ready to fend off another attack. But what he saw next left him utterly speechless. Emerging from the darkness, the alpha wolf reappeared, but this time it carried something in its jaws. As it approached, Henry saw it was a small, lifeless rabbit. The alpha dropped the rabbit a few feet away from him, then retreated and watched intently. Henry blinked in disbelief. What was going on? This went against everything he knew about wolf behavior. Why were they bringing him food? Was this some kind of test, or were they attempting to communicate? He cautiously reached out and picked up the rabbit. The wolf didn't react aggressively, they simply watched. He was hungry, and the gnawing pain in his stomach reminded him of his dire situation. With no other options, he decided to accept the wolf's offering. He used his knife to prepare the rabbit. The wolf stayed close, their presence was oddly comforting now. As he ate, Henry's thoughts churned. Maybe the wolves saw him as part of their pack, a member in need of aid, or perhaps they recognized his injury and understood he wasn't a threat. Whatever the reason, their actions were saving his life. The food gave him strength, and for the first time since his fall, he felt a glimmer of hope. The night wore on. The wolves settled around him in a protective circle. Henry drifted in and out of sleep, his exhaustion finally catching up with him. As dawn broke, the surreal events of the night played over in his mind. The wolves had spared him. More than that, they had helped him. The wilderness, it seemed, still held many secrets, and Henry was living one of the most unbelievable. The days that followed were a blur of pain, cold, and unexpected camaraderie with the wolves. Each morning, Henry woke to find fresh game brought by the pack. They maintained their silent vigil. Henry's injury prevented him from moving far, but he used the time to observe the wolves closely. He noticed the hierarchy within the pack, how they communicated through subtle gestures and sounds. The alpha wolf was clearly in charge, but there was also a strong sense of cooperation among them. They were a family bound by survival. Henry began to understand their routines. At dawn, the wolves would set out to hunt, leaving him alone for a few hours. He used this time to gather what he could from the surrounding area. With his limited mobility, he relied on makeshift crutches fashioned from sturdy branches. Each step was painful, but he pushed through, driven by the need to stay alive. One morning, while the wolves were away, Henry found a small stream not far from his makeshift camp. The water was freezing, but it was a vital resource. He filled his canteen, grateful for the find. On his way back, he gathered firewood, knowing that a fire would provide warmth and a means to cook the food the wolves brought. Building a fire with numb fingers was a challenge, but Henry's survival instincts kicked in. He used dry leaves and twigs as kindling and struck his flint until sparks ignited the small pile. As the fire grew, he felt a wave of relief wash over him. The warmth seeped into his bones, easing the relentless chill. When the wolves returned, they found Henry tending the fire and roasting a rabbit over the flames. The alpha approached cautiously, sniffing the air. Henry extended a piece of cooked meat towards the wolf. The alpha hesitated before accepting the offering. Henry's bond with the wolves deepened. They seemed to accept him as one of their own, and he began to trust them completely. He learned to interpret their signals, understanding when they sensed danger or when they were simply communicating among themselves. One evening, a storm rolled in, bringing with it a bone-chilling wind. Henry struggled to keep the fire going as the wind threatened to extinguish the flames. The wolves huddled close. Their bodies formed a shield against the harsh elements. Henry's injuries made it difficult for him to gather enough wood, and he feared the fire might go out. As the night wore on, the wind howled through the ravine. Henry could barely hear over the roar, but he felt the wolves' presence, their warm bodies pressed against him. Their breathing was rhythmic, and it provided a strange comfort amidst the storm. When the storm finally abated, Henry's relief was evident. The wolves remained steadfast by his side, their loyalty unshakable. As days turned into weeks, his injuries slowly healed, thanks to the unwavering support of the wolves. They had become more than just his protectors, they were his companions and teachers. He learned to interpret their subtle cues and grasp their silent communication. They had given him a chance to survive, and in return, he developed a profound respect for these majestic creatures. His ordeal in the ravine had forged an extraordinary bond with the wolves. Without their aid, survival would have been impossible. As he prepared to leave, he cast one last look at the pack. The alpha wolf met his gaze, and in that moment, Henry felt overwhelming gratitude. The wilderness had tested him, but it had also shown him the incredible kindness and unity of its inhabitants. With his legs still weak but functional, Henry limped away from the ravine. The snow-covered forest lay before him, and he took his first steps towards recovery. The experience had transformed him. He had witnessed the power of empathy and the resilience of survival against all odds. The wolves had saved his life, and their legacy would remain with him forever. What an incredible story! If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below. See you in the next video.